In a quiet chamber in ancient Athens, a man sits beside a cup of hemlock. He is not trembling. He is not afraid. Socrates understood something the city around him had forgotten, that a life without truth is a life already lost. He did not fear death. He feared only the death of integrity. So the question remains, echoing across centuries, gentle yet unyielding. What does it mean to remain true to oneself when the world demands silence? A man of questions. Athens was a city of marble columns and open skies. The air carried the sound of merchants calling out prices, sandals scuffing against stone, laughter drifting from wine houses, and the constant clamor of thought. For Athens was not simply a place to live, but a place to argue, to dream, to define what life meant. And through these crowded streets walked a man who seemed, at first glance, entirely ordinary. Barefoot, cloak worn and plain, beard untrimmed. Nothing about him announced greatness. He was simply Socrates, a man who asked questions. He did not lecture from a grand stage or claim divine revelation. He preferred the marketplace, the gymnasium, the corner where two streets met. He spoke with merchants arranging their goods in the morning sun. He spoke with stonecutters whose hands were rough and stained with dust. He spoke with children who had not yet learned to be afraid of wondering. Socrates believed that wisdom did not belong to scholars or judges or poets alone. It lived within every person, hidden just behind the surface of their certainty. And so he would stop someone, look gently into their eyes, and ask, "Tell me, what is courage, or justice, or goodness, or love?" No matter how they answered, confidently, nervously, impatiently, he would ask again, "And what do you mean by that?" Not to humiliate, not to win, but to draw out something true, something deeper than habit or inherited belief. To Socrates, truth was not a possession. It was a journey, and every conversation was a step. Socrates taught nothing in the usual sense. He claimed no doctrine, held no scrolls, wrote nothing down. His philosophy lived in spoken words, in the flow of conversation, fragile, human, alive. If writing preserved thought, then speech revealed it. By asking simple yet piercing questions, he revealed how little people truly understood about the values they insisted they lived by. The politicians who claimed to be virtuous, the poets who claimed divine insight, the citizens who spoke of justice as though it were obvious. One by one, their arguments unraveled, not because Socrates mocked them, but because he guided them back to the beginning, to not knowing. For Socrates believed that the beginning of wisdom was not certainty, but humility. I know that I know nothing. This was not despair, not cynicism. It was clarity. When one admits they do not know, they become free to learn. When one lays down the armor of being right, truth can finally approach. In a culture that admired eloquence and victory in debate, Socrates did something revolutionary. He admired honesty instead. He admired the courage to say, "I don't know." He challenged the Athenians to question themselves, to live deliberately, to examine their beliefs the way a sculptor examines stone, searching for what is hidden beneath the rough surface. Philosophy, to him, was not academic study. It was something far more intimate, the art of living. He believed that every human being contains within themselves a message, a purpose, the shape of the soul waiting to be uncovered. And the only way to discover it was to look inward, to ask, why do I desire what I desire? Why do I fear what I fear? Why do I choose the life I choose? These questions were the beginning of self-knowledge. But there was something disarming, even unsettling, about him. Socrates did not guide people gently toward comfortable truths. He guided them toward themselves. And often, the self is where we least want to look. His presence disturbed the powerful because he revealed how little their authority rested on wisdom. He disturbed the proud because he revealed how fragile self-certainty can be. He disturbed those who valued reputation over truth because he refused to treat truth as something that could be shaped for convenience. He lived simply. He owned little. Some thought him foolish. But to Socrates, joy did not come from possessions or applause. It came from the integrity of one's own soul, from aligning one's life with what one knew to be right. He believed that a person could lose everything and still remain whole, so long as they did not surrender their honesty. And yet, he was loved by many. Young men followed him through the streets, drawn by the clarity of his presence, the calmness of his voice, the deep and quiet joy that came from watching someone who did not need to pretend. They watched as he listened, truly listened, with a patience that made even the most restless minds settle. They watched how he asked questions not to defeat, but to understand. They watched how he lived in alignment with his beliefs, as though truth were not an idea but a way of breathing. Socrates offered no certainty, no comforting doctrine, only the invitation to look inward and not turn away. For him, the examined life was not merely a philosophical exercise. It was the only life worth living. He believed that wisdom was not found in conclusion, but in curiosity, not in answers, but in the courage to keep asking. And so each morning, as Athens awoke beneath the brightness of the Mediterranean sun, Socrates walked once more through the marketplace, barefoot, gentle, unhurried, searching not for victory, but for understanding. Wisdom does not arrive as thunder or revelation. It arrives as a question, a quiet invitation to look closer, to peel back the layers of certainty we wear like armor. Socrates did not seek to change the world, only to help each person see themselves more clearly. And that, perhaps, is where all change truly begins. Athens after war. The Athens that Socrates walked through in his later years was not the Athens of his youth. The golden age of philosophers, sculptors, playwrights, and democratic pride had dimmed. The Peloponnesian War, a long bitter struggle against Sparta, had left the city scarred in body and in spirit. Streets once filled with the laughter of festivals now echoed with quieter, heavier footsteps. Markets where ideas once bloomed freely now held the weight of hardship and loss. Homes were empty where sons, brothers, and fathers had once lived. Walls once believed to be impenetrable lay in ruins. Pride had given way to hunger, confidence to confusion. Athens, once the radiant heart of the Greek world, now carried the dignity of someone who has seen too much and can no longer pretend otherwise. And in such times, a city does not seek reflection. It seeks certainty. People wanted answers that were clear, strong, unshakable. They wanted leaders who promised restoration, identity, power. They wanted to believe that someone knew what to do, what to repair, what to reclaim. The wounds of war had made honesty, the raw truth of not knowing, feel like weakness. And so new voices rose in the city. Voices of demagogues, sophists, and ambitious politicians. Voices that spoke loudly, forcefully, confidently. Voices that promised clarity. They did not ask questions. They delivered instructions. In this atmosphere, Socrates' way of speaking, gentle, slow, probing, began to feel unsettling. To ask someone to examine their beliefs when those beliefs were the only thing holding them together felt like cruelty. To ask leaders to explain themselves felt like defiance. To admit ignorance, as Socrates did, felt like surrender. And so the very humility that once inspired admiration now stirred resentment. Socrates continued to walk barefoot through the city, unchanged. He continued to speak with those who would listen. He continued to ask, what is justice? What is courage? How should one live? But now these questions arrived in a city that was tired of being uncertain. The Athenians had seen what chaos looked like. They had lost loved ones, dignity, and faith in their institutions. They no longer wanted to be reminded that truth is difficult, that the soul must be examined, that wisdom begins in not knowing. They wanted firm ground beneath their feet. Socrates was asking them to stand in the open field of doubt. To many, this felt dangerous. He questioned generals who claimed to be brave. He questioned politicians who claimed to be wise. He questioned poets who claimed to speak for the gods. He questioned the very foundations upon which people built their sense of worth. Not to destroy them, but to reveal what was real beneath all appearance. But in an injured city, people cling to their appearances even more tightly. There were those who whispered that Socrates was tearing down civic unity, that he was corrupting the young, teaching them to challenge authority, tradition, the sacred. Some said he was aligned with the aristocrats who had briefly seized power and brought terror to the city. Others simply fear the power of his speech, not because he imposed his views, but because he freed others from theirs. And freedom, when a city is frightened, is often perceived as threat. Philosophers of earlier decades had been loved, honored, celebrated. But Athens had changed, and Socrates' way of seeking truth no longer aligned with what the wounded city needed, or believed it needed to survive. This was not a conflict of ideas. It was a conflict of emotional climates. When a society suffers loss, it begins to value safety over inquiry, order over exploration, obedience over authenticity, and the man who asks questions becomes dangerous. Socrates had always believed that a healthy society must guide itself with self-knowledge, just as a healthy person must understand their own soul. He believed that courage must be rooted in truth, that justice must be examined rather than assumed, that a life unexamined was not truly lived. But Athens, grieving and raw, had no patience for philosophy. The city began to look at Socrates not as a teacher, but as a disturber of peace. His questions were seen not as invitations to wisdom, but as attacks on stability. His followers, the young men who gathered around him, were viewed with suspicion, as though curiosity itself had become rebellion. And slowly, a narrative began to take shape. Socrates is dangerous. Socrates is undermining tradition. Socrates is corrupting our sons. Socrates must be stopped. In times of fear, we choose the comfort of certainty over the discomfort of truth. We forget that reflection is not weakness. That questioning is not betrayal. That wisdom is not loud. The city that had once valued dialogue now flinched at it. The city that had once celebrated debate now feared it. The city that had once built itself on freedom of thought now sought to silence the man who embodied that freedom most purely. Socrates did not change. Athens did. And the distance between them widened not through anger, but through pain. The stage for his trial was not set by hatred. It was set by fear. And fear, when it seeks safety, often sacrifices the very wisdom that could have healed it. The disruption. Socrates did not write books. He did not stand on stages or address crowds. His philosophy happened in the open air of the marketplace, on the worn stone steps of temples, on shaded porches where merchants rested from the sun. He would approach someone, a politician, a poet, a craftsman, and begin not with a lecture, but with a question. What is justice? What is virtue? What does it mean to live well? And in a city that believed itself to be wise, these questions were not gentle. They were mirrors, and mirrors are not always welcome. Socrates did not pretend to know the answers. He claimed no higher truth. Yet, with patient curiosity, he revealed how many people spoke with great certainty about things they did not truly understand. A politician confident and admired might suddenly find himself unable to define the very virtues he claimed to defend. A poet praised for divine insight might struggle to explain the meaning behind his own verses. A general revered for courage might be unable to say what courage actually is. Socrates did not humiliate these men. He simply asked them to look inward. And that is something many would rather avoid, because self-knowledge requires vulnerability, and vulnerability threatens status, pride, reputation. His questioning revealed that the powerful did not fully understand their own authority, that those who claimed wisdom had not examined its roots, that righteousness was often performance, and performance, once exposed, resists being seen. The young men of Athens noticed this. They gathered around him, not because he gave them answers, but because he gave them permission to ask, to doubt, to look deeper than the surface of things. These were sons of wealthy families, heirs to influence and power. They were being trained to inherit the city. And in Socrates, they found something rare, a man who did not care who they were, only whether their words were true. He did not flatter them. He did not impress them. He challenged them, and in doing so, he awakened them. Some found clarity. Some found humility. Some found direction. Others found only the uncomfortable truth that they did not yet know who they were. And this, too, was dangerous, because those who begin to question themselves eventually begin to question society. The city's elders watched as their sons, once obedient, once respectful, once aligned with tradition, began to carry new eyes. They spoke with subtle doubt. They considered alternative paths. They asked why things must be as they are. A city can tolerate one philosopher, but it struggles to tolerate a generation of them. Voices in the agora began to shift. Conversations turned into whispers. Admiration turned into suspicion. He speaks in riddles. He confuses the minds of the young. He plants ideas that disrupt the city's order. And then came the more dangerous accusations. He does not honor the gods. He brings new gods into the city. He is undermining the foundations of Athens. These claims did not reflect what Socrates taught. He did not teach rebellion. He did not teach disrespect. In truth, Socrates believed deeply in acting justly, in obeying the law, in care of the soul. But rumors require neither accuracy nor fairness. They only require fear. And Athens, still wounded from war, was full of fear. There were those who remembered the recent tyranny, a brutal regime led by men who had once been close to Socrates' students. It did not matter that Socrates himself had opposed their violence. What mattered was that proximity was enough to stain him in the minds of many. The story began to form, slowly, quietly, like a shadow growing across stone. Socrates is dangerous. Socrates must be watched. Socrates must be stopped. Not because of what he had done, but because of what he represented. The truth he asked people to face was not the kind that comforted. It was not the truth that reassures or soothes. It was the truth that exposes the cracks beneath certainty. The truth that demands inner change instead of outward victory. The truth that reminds us how little we truly control. And comfort does not welcome such truth. So the tension rose, calm, invisible, but real. A tightening of the city's breath. A quiet recall. The kind of unease that builds not with conflict, but with avoidance. Socrates continued to walk through the city, unchanged. His questions remained gentle. His manner remained calm. But the city had begun to see him differently, not as a teacher, but as a catalyst. A disturber of peace. A man whose very presence required self-reflection, and reflection was now unwelcome. There are truths that comfort, and there are truths that confront. Socrates spoke the second, and those who cling to certainty will always fear the one who invites them to ask, what if we are not who we believe ourselves to be? What if knowledge begins in admitting we do not know? In the quiet spaces of the city, where conversation once blossomed freely, people now lowered their voices when he passed. Some avoided his gaze. Some watched him with wary curiosity. And some, silently, began to prepare the case that would remove him. Not with anger. Not with hatred. But with the cold logic of a city that had decided that its comfort mattered more than its conscience. The disruption had already begun. The trial was only a matter of time. The trial. The day of the trial arrives with no fanfare, no shouting in the streets, no grand procession. Athens does not stage it as a spectacle of moral clarity, but as something almost ordinary, administrative, a matter of procedure, of civic housekeeping. And yet, in the crowded chamber where citizens press shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on a single old man standing unbound before the court, something far deeper is unfolding. Socrates stands without fear, not because he believes he will be spared, but because fear has never been the measure by which he chooses his actions. The courtroom is tense, the air thick, heavy, humid with accusation and anticipation. Men mutter behind beards. Young students watch with wide eyes. Elders cross their arms. The charges are read aloud, charges both vague and cutting, corrupting the youth, not believing in the gods of the city, introducing new divinities, accusations of the mind, of influence, of invisible seeds planted in thought. These are more dangerous than crimes of action. For who can truly measure the movement of ideas? When asked to respond, Socrates does not bow. He does not perform remorse. He does not plead or decorate his words to soften the room. Instead, he simply speaks. He tells the court that he is guilty only of one thing, encouraging Athenians to examine their lives. He says calmly, "You are upset with me because I remind you of what you do not wish to see. I am the gadfly placed upon the city, not to wound it, but to wake it." He does not flatter the jury. He does not appeal to their pride. He does not manipulate their sympathies. He speaks plainly, as though in conversation on the street. He asks them, is it better to live committing injustice or to die having lived justly? The room shifts. Some lean forward. Some look away. This is not the language of defense. This is the language of truth, and truth can be unbearable. The prosecution paints him as arrogant, dangerous, a man who leads the youth astray with riddles and clever speech. But Socrates does not defend his reputation, because reputation was never what mattered to him. What matters is the state of the soul. So he asks the court to consider not whether he is pleasing, not whether he conforms, but whether he lives in alignment with what is good. And here is the quiet tragedy. Many in the room know he speaks honestly, but honesty is not what the city needs right now. Athens is tired. Tired of war. Tired of humiliation. Tired of uncertainty. The city wants unity, confidence, order, not questions. Socrates represents the opposite of that. He reminds them that the ground beneath their feet is not as solid as they pretend. He reminds them that wisdom begins in admitting one's ignorance. And in a wounded city, such reminders feel like attacks. The vote is cast. A narrow majority declares him guilty. But the trial is not finished. Now Socrates may choose his punishment. He may suggest exile, silence, retreat. He may promise to cease questioning. He may choose life, if only he is willing to abandon the calling that has defined his existence. The room waits. He pauses, not from hesitation, but from gentle consideration, as though choosing the right word in conversation. Then, with a calm that unsettles the entire city, he says, "What should my punishment be? If I have spent my life helping you examine yourselves, I should be rewarded, not punished. Perhaps free meals for life in the public hall." Yes, nervous laughter. Anger rising like heat on stone. He smiles, not mockingly, but softly, as though explaining something obvious. To abandon my questioning would be to abandon my soul. To stop would be to harm myself, and I will not do harm to myself or to others. He chooses integrity over survival. He does not choose exile. He does not choose silence. He chooses truth, even if truth leads to death. The vote for his sentence is cast again. This time, the majority is larger. Death. He has one final chance to appeal. One final chance to plead for mercy. One final chance to say what the city wants to hear. But Socrates does not speak to win. He speaks to remain whole. Voiceover slows, soft, reverent. He believed that the well-being of the soul matters more than the length of a life. So instead of begging, he teaches. He tells the court that death is either dreamless sleep, which is peace, or a journey to meet those who have passed before. Heroes, poets, thinkers. In either case, he says, there is nothing to fear. The room shifts again. Some feel awe. Some feel confusion. Some feel anger at the man who refuses to break. Then he delivers the line that will echo through centuries. The unexamined life is not worth living, not a condemnation, not a boast. A simple truth, given freely, even now, at the threshold of death. The trial ends without applause. No victory, no triumph. Only the quiet knowing that something irreversible has happened. Power has silenced wisdom. And yet, wisdom has not truly been silenced. For though the city has sentenced him to die, Socrates has already chosen how to live. Some victories are not meant for this world. The scene fades, not to action, but to stillness. A cup waits on a stone table. Outside, the city continues, unaware that it has just condemned the conscience that once called it to know itself. The choice. Night settles over Athens. The streets grow quiet. Oil lamps flicker in the stone corridors of the prison. Outside, life continues. Merchants close their stalls. Mothers call their children in from play. The city exhales into sleep. But within these walls, there is a hush, not of fear, but of contemplation. Socrates is not alone. His students come to him one by one, faces marked with desperation, grief, disbelief. They are young, still full of the brightness of life. They cannot understand how the city could condemn the very man who taught them to think, to feel, to see. They beg him, "Master, we can free you. We have planned everything. The guards can be persuaded. The night can hide you. You could leave Athens, live, teach, continue your work." They speak quickly, with urgency. They speak in tears, in trembling hands, in love that cannot bear loss. But Socrates does not move. He listens, deeply, kindly, as he always has. He places a hand on a shoulder, looks into their eyes without fear or sorrow. Then he asks them softly, "If I run, what becomes of everything I ever taught you?" The room stills, because they already know the answer. Socrates had spent his life telling them that virtue matters more than comfort, that the soul is shaped by action. that to know what is right and to refuse it for the sake of safety is a kind of death far deeper than the one the city has decreed. He says, "My body is theirs to judge, but my soul, that is mine. There is no anger in him, no bitterness, only clarity, like a candle steady in a window where the wind cannot reach." He explains, to flee would be to declare that justice depends on convenience, that principles bend when the cost becomes heavy. But a principle only lives when it is lived. He pauses. "My friends, I have spent my life teaching that the examined soul is free. Now it is time for me to show you what that means." Silence fills the room, not empty, but full of weight. The students realize something. Socrates does not stay because he wants to die. He stays because he wants to remain whole. Outside, the night is very still. Inside, the conversation moves like a slow river, gentle, faithful, unhurried. They speak of virtue, of beauty, of the immortality of the soul, not as theories, not as abstractions, but as real things alive in this moment. This final gathering is not a farewell. It is a continuation of the dialogue that has always defined their relationship. Socrates is not preparing for death. He is living fully attentively until the final breath. He tells them, "Do not grieve that I am leaving you. Grieve only if you fail to care for your own soul." He reminds them of the work ahead, to examine themselves, to question, to choose truth over approval, to walk the path that does not guarantee comfort, but guarantees meaning. The night deepens. Shadows stretch along the stone floor. The oil in the lamp burns low. The city believes it has condemned him, but Socrates has already made his choice. He chooses to remain. He chooses to face the cup when it comes. He chooses to honor the teachings he lived by. And in doing so, he becomes freer than anyone who has ever walked outside those prison walls. Freedom is not found in escape. Freedom is found in remaining true. Even when the world turns away, the scene fades into quiet. Only the lamp remains, burning steadily in the dark. The hemlock. Morning rises pale against the prison walls. The light is thin, almost colorless, like the world holding its breath. Socrates sits upright, as he always has, speaking softly with the few students who remain. There is no trembling in him, no dread in his posture. His presence is steady, like a tree rooted deep in the earth. The door opens. The guard enters, not triumphant, not cruel, but quiet, almost sorrowful. He carries a small clay cup. Inside it, the bitter extract of hemlock. The guard cannot look Socrates in the eye. In Athens, it is said that the hemlock works slowly. First the limbs grow numb, then the breath slows, then the heart, gently like falling asleep. The cup is placed before him. The students break. One turns away, covering his face. Another grips the stone wall as though the world is collapsing. Tears fall freely, not dramatic, but helpless, raw, childlike. Socrates looks at them with compassion, not sorrow. He reaches out, placing a calming hand on the trembling shoulder of the nearest. "Do not weep as though something terrible is happening," he says quietly. "What comes now is simply the next step, what comes to all who live." He lifts the cup. His hand does not shake. There is no hesitation, not even a breath of doubt. He speaks softly, almost gently amused, as though correcting a small misunderstanding. "I was sacrificed to Asclepius. Let us not forget to pay the debt. Asclepius, the god of healing." Even in this moment, Socrates is teaching. To him, death is not punishment. It is release. The final healing of a life lived with integrity. His students cannot bear it. One cries out, "Socrates, please stay. Just a moment longer. Speak again. Say something more." Socrates smiles, warm, loving, eternal. "Have I not already said everything?" He drinks. Not hurriedly, not grimly, but with the calm of a man finishing a meal among friends. He returns the cup to the table. There is no drama, no collapse, no final speech for the ages. He simply continues speaking about the soul, about courage, about kindness. Then, after a moment, he grows quiet. He touches his leg with the back of his hand. Numb, he notes with curiosity, like a physician observing his own body from afar. The numbness rises slowly, feet, calves, knees, waist, like the gentle tide of some invisible sea. His students watch, devastated, but he continues to comfort them. "It is just the body," he whispers. "The soul is untouched." The numbness reaches his chest. His breathing grows slow, soft, unforced. He reclines, not collapsing, but lowering himself carefully, as though settling into a comfortable rest. No pain crosses his face. No fear clouds his eyes. His body becomes still. His final breath is not dramatic. It is simply quiet. A release. A return. The room falls into profound silence. For a long time, no one speaks. The world seems thinner, lighter, as though something precious has passed not into absence, but into the air itself. Voiceover soft, reverent. He did not die. He simply finished speaking. The camera remains still. The lamp flickers. The cup rests where he set it. The students weep, not for him, but for themselves. Outside, Athens goes on. Markets open. Ships arrive in the harbor. Children play in the dust. No proclamation is made. No monument is built. No music is played. And yet, a moment has occurred that will echo for thousands of years. A man has shown what it means to live according to one's soul, all the way to the end. Fade to silence. The legacy of questioning. In the days that follow, Athens is strangely quiet. Life continues. Markets reopen, ships sail, voices fill the agora again. Yet something unseen has shifted, like a harp string pulled too tight and left humming. Plato does not speak for a long time. He wanders the streets where Socrates once walked barefoot, where conversations flowed like water in summer heat. Now the fountain has gone still. He returns to his room, a small dim place lit only by a single oil lamp, and he begins to write. Not quickly, not feverishly, but with the steady hand of someone carrying something sacred. He writes the voice he remembers, the questions, the laughter, the long pauses before truth arrive like dawn breaking. He writes to keep Socrates alive, and through his words, Socrates does not fade. He becomes the root from which Western philosophy grows, ethics, logic, the search for meaning, the courage to examine one's own life. A simple act asking, "Why do you believe this?" becomes the seed of civilizations. Because truth begins not with certainty, but with humility. This is Socrates' greatest gift. Not a doctrine, not a scripture, not an answer, but a posture, a way of being, a willingness to question even the foundations of one's self. For centuries, rulers, thinkers, poets, scientists, and ordinary people will return to his words, not to learn what to think, but how to think. His death becomes a message passed quietly through time. Power may silence a voice, but power cannot silence the honesty that voice awakens in others. A body can be buried, but an idea lives wherever there is a mind willing to ask, "Is this true? Is this just? Is this mine, or something I have merely accepted?" Socrates is no martyr carved in marble. He is a whisper that travels farther than any shout, a reminder that wisdom is not loud. It is steady, persistent, patient. It waits in the mind, in the pause between two thoughts, in the question that trembles just before being spoken. His death was not an end, but a beginning. Not silence, but a doorway. Not absence, but awakening. And somewhere, even now, someone takes a quiet breath, looks inward, and finally asks, "Why?" The question left for us. And now the lesson remains, not in speeches, not in debates, but in the quiet question that lingers after the voices fade. What will you dare to ask? What truth will you honor, even if the world demands silence? Socrates reminds us that wisdom is not comfort, and courage is not loud. It is the stillness that chooses honesty, the voice that refuses to be bowed, even in the shadow of fear. Tonight, in your own thoughts, listen for the question you have been avoiding. Lean into it. Sit with it. Let it shape you as the hemlock shaped him. Truth is not taken, it is carried. And the courage to carry it begins quietly within each of us.